Alexander Lukashenko has warned the Poles that if they don't stop placing extra military U.S. bases on their territory, then Moscow and Minsk will have to respond. German Foreign Affairs Office insists that for the sake of peace it's necessary to revise the weapons control system. They promise that Europe will attempt to persuade the U.S. not to withdraw from the Short-Range Rockets Treaty. One should probably put a million smileys here, because we all realize what these attempts will end up with. It's obvious for everyone how Europe managed to convince the Americans in relation to Iran. Two countries succeeded, Italy and Greece. The U.S. not only withdrew from the deal, but they also implement sanctions against Iran, which means sanctions against the major European countries such as Germany. What's going to happen next? Those who closely follow the Iran nuclear deal will easily be able to project this onto Russia, because we clearly realize that everything that is tested on Iran will sooner or later be applied to us. It's interesting to see that SWIFT has already stated that several banks will be blocked. We see the sanctions being implemented over the Iranian major airlines company and their planes against the Iranian National Bank. We can see that a Russian bank which belongs to an Iranian entity is also under sanctions. And we in China have been told to behave. We understand what they want from us. The question is what we should do in this situation.
It's just another episode of the same show. Americans basically say we are going to determine who can do what. We Americans can do this and that, well, basically everything. But you can't. You Iranians are not allowed to have your power of influence in this country, in that one and wherever. Anyway, your regime is wrong. And they treat the same way all the countries around the world, except that some counties can resist, while others can't. As far as Iranians, this by the way will teach them a lesson. When the sanctions were removed under Obama, they were happy and saying new times have come and nothing will be the same anymore.
And who did they let in?
Absolutely. They let the Western companies in. European and even some American companies. And many others.
But not us.
But not us. I've been in touch with them a lot. And I remember this euphoria period. It's a good lesson to learn for everybody, not only for Iranians. This is what dealing with the US means. Today they say yes, tomorrow they will say no. The day after tomorrow they will come up with something else. Then they will say yes, but with 50 prerequisites. The United States of America is an unreliable partner. So let Iranians and anyone trying to get a deal with them, by the way you mentioned Belarus here, let them keep that in mind. So from this point of view it's good that Americans behave so bluntly, cynically and unceremoniously in relation to Iran and the sanctions and stuff. One shouldn't overestimate the domination of morality police in there. The dissidents arriving in the US will definitely say whatever is profitable for them.
Listen to what our own dissidents say when they come to the US. Judging by their words, Russia is no more.
It's necessary to remember that Iran has been in this situation for 40 years. Americans haven't been able to achieve their goal for 40 years now. This is quite difficult. Why? Because they are not ready to wage a war against Iran, as this war could lead to unforeseen consequences. They've been waiting for the regime to change. Change of regime in Iran and in the Ukraine or any other European country are totally different things. Even the change of regime in Iraq is nowhere close to change of regime in Iran. Because the regime in Iran rests itself on religious postulates. Thus overthrowing the power of Ayatollahs in Iran will imply a serious war against Islam inside Iran. Which is impossible for Iran. These Ayatollahs know what they are doing perfectly well. They base their political power on postulates of Karen. You can agree or disagree with this. But this is what has served as cement mortar for their regime for 40 years under sanctions.
Through hanging people.
While in the US they use electric chair and lethal injections.
It's only applied to murderers. And what about Iran?
In Iran they do the same as in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia.
When there are no facts, the best way is to get emotional. This is a well-known trick. But this is exactly what the problem is. And you understand it. And American regime understands very well that it's impossible to get to those guys that easy. They've been trying to change the regime for 40 years to no avail. But it's scary to go to war. That's why I believe that these sanctions won't result in any change of regime or any explosion either. Yes, there are some manifestations against the unemployment, but not against the morality police or the Ayatollah's regime.
You're telling lies now.
What I'm saying is true.
They were shouting death to Russia.
Doesn't matter what they were shouting. I saw this kind of manifestations myself. Do you know how these things are organized? About a year ago, a minor group of people were passing by the Russian embassy shouting "Death to Russia." That was a setup with 40 to 50 people were shouting in front of the camera "Death to Russia." Then this video was sent over here, and based on it they attempted to pull a certain manipulation between Russia and Iran. Look, Ariel, I know how these things are done. And Americans are experts in this field. So nothing like that will work with Iran.
There have been numerous attempts. Who brought Khamenei to power? Who dethroned the Shah?
Americans?
You were not aware?
Oh, come on.
It's a historical fact. When they were taking Khamenei from Paris, Israelis were ready to take very unpopular and decisive actions. Americans said, "Don't you dare to do that."
So although the situation is really tense, surprising as it might seem, this whole thing turns out not too bad for us. Iranians get to know what kind of people Americans are. There is another opportunity to get closer with Russia. So Russia could achieve its goals in the region. Europeans get even more irate by the American insolence and impunity. We could make use of that too if our government was courageous enough.
Exactly, they should not be afraid.
And the last thing. There is a potentially very dangerous issue related to Iran, which is not widely discussed yet. I mean Armenia. Americans are afraid to start a war against Iran, but they are preparing the points of pressure on Iran. What's happening now? There was a change of regime in Armenia. And I'm not going to say that its Americans have nothing to do with it. Political correctness is not my style. Of course they take part in this. There are plenty of American protégés in there. What Americans promised to the current Armenian regime is to resolve the Karabakh problem. How to do it? You let us enter in this region. We place out troops there. And we get a base for pressuring Iran from the north. This is one of the options that Americans are trying to implement in the Caucasus. And Bolton's visit to Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan was to negotiate on this matter. I believe that it's not going to happen, but this option is definitely offered to Armenians. Just a couple of words on Belarus. We should admit that Belarus nationalists exist and make statements as much as they are allowed to do so by Alexander Lukashenko in pursuit of his own internal and sometimes international goals. Secondly, as far as the Union state formation is concerned, back in the day this process stumbled upon one simple thing. Alexander Lukashenko wanted to know what his perspectives will be within the newly built state. He got an answer from Moscow that there were none. This was the point where the Union State project development stopped.
I have to clarify one point. Back then I talked to one of the people who actually buried the project. And his last name was Chubais, who directly stated that he was taking every effort for such integration not to happen.
Can I have 15 seconds, please? Why are you saying there are no perspectives? There could be president of the Union State and 2 vice presidents, one from Russia, the other one from Belarus.
Back then this was exactly what hindered the integration. When Boris Yeltsin and his team were afraid they would lose. They feared Lukashenko like the plague. That's why they couldn't discuss any options to proceed. This was what jammed the Union cooperation. Should we choose to revive this project now, we need to make very daring decisions. There has to be a totally different approach. A much more flexible approach. By the way, we also need a more flexible approach in the rest of the issues. You've mentioned many times that there are even bigger sanctions ahead of us. By the way, many of your forecasts came true. When all those ministers back then, and some of them are still ministers today, would say no way, it's impossible. Americans are decent people. They are not like us. They will never put those sanctions. Well, they did. So we have to finally set our minds free. And understand that there is no red line. We have to become more flexible to come up with ways to solve our own problems, rather than inventing ways to please Americans. It seems to me that our foreign policy as well as the economy policy are trying to get Americans to like us. So that they finally understand and forgive us, pat us on the back. But we should really be doing something different. We have to look for the ways to achieve our own goals. For instance, the payment systems. They say that it's not possible within an economy this small. Has anyone tried it?
They have. North Korea has. Cuba has. You want Russia to become North Korea?
I don't want Russia to become your stinky colony.
Who's stinky?
Your country.
Why is there a line of people in front of our embassy?
A line of traitors. I'm not in that line.
Ah, traitors. Right. You want Iran to be Russia's ally.
Wait a second, and who are your allies? You don't have any. You only have satellite states.
And Saudi Arabia, where they still cut heads. By the way, you are against that, but they keep doing that. So within this frame to please the US, we very often miss the creative ways to fulfill this or that objective. It says in an American book that this is impossible. The American or European economists said, but has anyone tried?
You have already tried state planning in 1928 and then you spit blood for 50 years.
We implemented state planning in 1928 and won the war. Created the second economy in the world.
When we don't do that, and instead simply listen to them, we get the situation like we used to have aircraft construction. Why can't we sell our planes? Because we can't build this much. Why can't we? Because following the advice given by Western consultants back in the day, we killed our aircraft industry. We slaughtered it. Was it that bad after all? They didn't fly well enough? Nothing of the kind. Partially due to corruption, partially because we listened to the competent opinion of Western colleagues. As a result, we couldn't sell aircraft to Iran and others, not only because of contractual issues, not because they simply decided to shift to Europeans. The reason was that when they asked if we were able to supply this many planes within this time frame, we said no, we can't. Why not? Because we had buried our own aircraft industry following that advice. So your references to state planning, like it was a mistake. Cuba and North Korea, don't do that. Our economist wrote that it can't be done. We must do what is profitable to us rather than what American economists write.